Welcome back, my people. I see you've been waiting. Good. Because what comes next is the part where the mask falls, the truth rises, and justice, that beautiful, terrible thing, finally arrives. When we left Grace, she was sitting in a holding cell, wearing handcuffs and an engagement ring, accused of crimes she didn't commit. David Oladele stood at his window 60 floors above, realizing he'd made a terrible mistake. And Beatrice Okonkwo sat in her luxury apartment, drinking champagne, believing she had won. But my people, let me tell you something about victory. Real victory is not declared by the victor. It is confirmed by history. And history was about to be written.
Life stories with the innocent. Stories just for you. Ancient wisdom for modern lives.
The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and despair. Grace sat on the cold metal bench, still wearing the navy blue dress she'd put on that morning when the world still made sense. The engagement ring caught the harsh fluorescent light, throwing tiny rainbows on the concrete wall. She had been there for 6 hours. No phone call, no lawyer, just questions from detectives who already believed she was guilty. How long had she been planning the theft? Who was her contact at the competitor company? Did she seduce the CEO to gain access to confidential files? That last question had made Grace flinch like she'd been struck. Because she knew. That's what everyone would think. Poor girl meets rich man. Poor girl uses rich man. Tale as old as time. But Grace hadn't used David. She had loved him. First as a kind beggar who shared his bread, then as a mysterious man in an elevator, then as both, as all of him. And now, sitting in this cell, she wondered if she'd ever get the chance to tell him that. The door opened. A police officer appeared and told Grace she had a visitor. Grace's heart leaped. David. It had to be David. But when she was led to the visiting room, a small space divided by thick glass, the person sitting on the other side made her blood run cold. Beatrice Okonkwo. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost $5,000. Her makeup was perfect. Her smile was venomous. Grace sat down slowly, picking up the phone on her side of the glass. Beatrice picked up hers. And she said, in a voice dripping with false sympathy, "Oh, Grace, look at you. I heard what happened, and I just had to come see if you were okay." Grace said nothing. She just stared at Beatrice with eyes that had stopped crying hours ago. Beatrice continued, "Corporate espionage. That's serious. You could go to prison for years. 20, I heard. Maybe 30. Still, Grace said nothing. Beatrice leaned forward, her smile widening. "But you know what the worst part is? It's not the prison time. It's that everyone will know. Everyone will know that you were just another gold digger who tried to use a powerful man and got caught." Grace finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse but steady. She said, "You did this." Beatrice's eyes sparkled with malicious delight. She said, "Did I? That's a serious accusation, Grace. Do you have any proof?" Grace said, "Not yet. But the truth always comes out, Beatrice. Always." Beatrice laughed, a cold, brittle sound. She said, "The truth? The truth is that you're a nobody from nowhere who thought she could play in my world. And now you're exactly where you belong, behind bars." Then Beatrice stood, preparing to leave. But before she hung up the phone, she said one last thing. She said, "Oh, and Grace? David Oladele personally signed off on your suspension. He reviewed the evidence himself. So even your precious CEO thinks you're guilty." And with that final poison dart delivered, Beatrice hung up the phone and walked away, her heels clicking on the linoleum like gunshots. Grace sat there, gripping the phone, watching Beatrice disappear through the door. And for the first time since her arrest, she felt something other than fear. She felt rage. Pure, clean, righteous rage. Because Beatrice had made a mistake. She had revealed herself. She had gotten cocky. And cocky people make errors. Grace might be in a cell, but Beatrice had just shown her hand. And somewhere out there, Grace knew, someone was watching. 60 floors above the city, David Oladele sat in his office surrounded by computer screens. Mrs. Okafor sat beside him, her laptop open, her fingers flying across the keyboard. And beside her sat a man David had flown in from London on his private jet that very afternoon. Marcus Chen, former MI6 cybersecurity specialist, now one of the most expensive digital forensics experts in the world. David had paid him $50,000 just to get on the plane. He would pay 10 times that if it meant finding the truth. Marcus had been working for 6 hours straight, barely pausing to drink the coffee Mrs. Okafor kept bringing him. And his face, the face of a man who had investigated terrorist networks and state-sponsored hacking, was grim. He said, "Mr. Oladele, this is sophisticated work. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They used Miss Adeyemi's credentials, yes, but they also used a VPN to mask their location and scheduled the emails to send during times when Miss Adeyemi was provably elsewhere." David asked, "Can you trace it?" Marcus smiled slightly. "There's no such thing as a perfect digital crime, sir. Everyone leaves traces. It's just a matter of finding them." He pulled up a screen showing network logs, lines and lines of code that meant nothing to David but apparently meant everything to Marcus. Marcus said, "The person who framed Miss Adeyemi made 3 mistakes. First, they used the IT administrator's credentials to access her computer remotely. But they didn't realize the system logs the physical location of every login. The IT admin's credentials were used from an IP address in the marketing department. Not IT. Marketing." David leaned forward. "Can you narrow it down?" Marcus nodded. "Already done. The login came from a specific workstation, computer M253, registered to..." He pulled up another screen. "Beatrice Okonkwo, marketing director." Mrs. Okafor inhaled sharply. David's face remained expressionless, but his hands, resting on the desk, slowly curled into fists. Marcus continued. "Second mistake. The offshore account in Miss Adeyemi's name? It was opened using a fake passport, but the IP address that opened the account traced back to the same workstation. And the photo on the fake passport? It was photoshopped. Badly. The metadata shows it was edited on a computer in this building. Same workstation. M-253. David asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "And the third mistake?" Marcus pulled up security footage. "This building has cameras everywhere, including the parking garage. I pulled footage from the night the fake emails were sent from Miss Adeyemi's computer. And look who was in the building at 2 a.m.
when everyone else had gone home. The screen showed Beatrice Okonkwo walking through the parking garage, carrying her designer bag, heading toward the elevator. The timestamp, 2:17 a.m. The same time the incriminating emails were sent from Grace's computer. David stood up slowly. His face was a mask of cold fury that made even Marcus, who had interrogated terrorists, take a step back. David said, "I want everything. Every piece of evidence, every log file, every screenshot, compiled into a report that even a first-year law student couldn't refute. And I want it in 1 hour." Marcus said, "Sir, a thorough report will take at least—" David cut him off. His voice was ice. "1 hour, Mr. Chen, or I'll find someone who can." Marcus nodded quickly and went back to work. Mrs. Okafor looked at David with concern. She said, "What are you going to do?" David walked to his window. He looked down at the city, at the police station where Grace was being held, at the lights of Lagos spreading out like a glittering web of possibilities and lies. He said, "I'm going to do what I should have done the moment I saw that evidence. I'm going to trust the woman I love. And then I'm going to destroy the woman who hurt her." 1 hour later, David Oladele walked into the police station. He did not call ahead. He did not send lawyers. He walked in himself, wearing a suit that cost more than most officers' yearly salaries, carrying a briefcase that contained the compiled evidence from Marcus Chen. The desk sergeant looked up, recognized him immediately because everyone in Lagos knew David Oladele's face, and nearly fell out of his chair. David said, in a voice that brooked no argument, "I'm here for Grace Adeyemi. She was arrested this afternoon on charges of corporate espionage. I have evidence proving her innocence and identifying the actual perpetrator. I want her released immediately." The sergeant stammered, "Sir, we can't just— there are procedures." David placed the briefcase on the desk and opened it. Inside was the forensic report, all 73 pages of it, along with a USB drive containing the raw data, security footage, and network logs.
David said, "Call your captain. Call the district attorney. Call whoever you need to call. But Grace Adeyemi is innocent, and she will be released tonight. Or tomorrow morning, every newspaper in this country will know that the Lagos Police Department held an innocent woman while the real criminal walked free." The sergeant picked up the phone with shaking hands. 30 minutes later, Grace was brought from the holding cells. She looked exhausted. Her dress was wrinkled. Her hair was tangled. Her face was pale. But when she saw David standing in the police station lobby, when their eyes met, she stopped breathing. David crossed the space between them in 3 strides, and before anyone could say anything, before procedures or protocols or proper behavior could matter, he wrapped his arms around her and held her like he would never let go. Grace collapsed against him, her body shaking with sobs that had been held in for hours. David buried his face in her hair and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have trusted you. I'm sorry." Grace pulled back just enough to look at him. Her face was streaked with tears, and she said, "You came." David touched her face gently, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "I will always come for you. Always. No matter what." The police captain appeared then, looking uncomfortable.
He explained that, based on the evidence Mr. Oladele had provided, the charges against Miss Adeyemi were being dropped immediately. They would be issuing a formal apology, and they would be opening an investigation into Beatrice Okonkwo. David said, "An investigation isn't enough. I want her arrested. Tonight." The captain hesitated. "Sir, we need to verify the evidence. Follow protocol." David's voice cut through the room like a blade. "That woman framed an innocent person, destroyed her reputation, and tried to have her sent to prison for decades. If you don't arrest her tonight, I will hold a press conference at 7 a.m. tomorrow explaining exactly how the Lagos Police Department protected a criminal because she came from a wealthy family." The captain made a phone call. 20 minutes later, 4 police officers left the station, heading for Beatrice Okonkwo's luxury apartment. David took Grace home, not to her small apartment in the employee building, but to his penthouse, the one on the 60th floor, with walls of glass and a view of the entire city. He made her tea. He wrapped her in a soft blanket. He sat beside her on the couch and held her hand. And Grace, finally safe, finally believed, finally home, told him everything. She told him about Beatrice's visit to the jail, about the things she'd said, about the look of triumph on her face. David listened in silence, and with every word Grace spoke, his expression grew darker. When she finished, David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm going to tell you something, Grace, and I need you to listen carefully." Grace looked at him. David said, "I built this company from nothing. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I have power that most people can't even imagine. And I have never used that power to destroy someone." He paused. "But for what Beatrice did to you, I'm going to make an exception." Grace started to speak, but David shook his head. He said, "No, listen. I don't mean revenge. I don't mean cruelty. I mean justice. Real justice. The kind that ensures she never does this to anyone else. Ever." And then David made a phone call. Beatrice Okonkwo was in her apartment, already on her second bottle of champagne, when the police knocked on her door. At first, she didn't believe them. She laughed in their faces. She demanded to see their warrant. She threatened to call her father, her lawyer, her connections. But when they showed her the evidence, when they played the security footage of her entering the building at 2 a.m., when they showed her the network logs, when they explained that her workstation had been forensically analyzed, Beatrice's face went white. She tried to deny it. She said it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, a setup. But the evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, just like the evidence she had planted against Grace. They arrested her that night, handcuffed her in her luxury apartment with her designer clothes and her expensive furniture and her Hermes bag sitting on the counter, the same bag that had started everything. As they led her out, Beatrice screamed. She demanded a lawyer. She demanded to speak to David Oladele. She demanded justice. The irony was not lost on the officers.
The trial took 4 months. Beatrice's father hired the best lawyers money could buy. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that Beatrice had been framed, that David Oladele was using his power to destroy a rival. But Marcus Chen testified. He walked the jury through every piece of digital evidence with the patience of a teacher and the precision of a surgeon. Mrs. Okafor testified about Beatrice's history with Grace. Security guards testified about Beatrice's late-night visits to the building. And Grace testified. She told her story. The hotel, the handbag, the humiliation, the firing.
She spoke quietly, without drama, just stating facts. And when she was done, even Beatrice's lawyers had nothing to say. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Corporate espionage, identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy. The judge sentenced Beatrice to 15 years in federal prison. As the bailiffs led her away, Beatrice looked at Grace one last time. And Grace looked back. Not with triumph, not with satisfaction, but with something else. Pity. Because Grace understood something that Beatrice never would. The measure of a person is not how much they have, but how much they are willing to share when they have nothing. And Beatrice, who had everything, had shared nothing but cruelty. 6 months after the trial, Grace and David were married. Not in a grand cathedral, not at a luxury resort, but in a small church in the neighborhood where Grace had grown up, the neighborhood where her mother had raised her, where she'd learned kindness and gratitude and strength. Grace wore a simple white dress. David wore a suit. And the church was filled with people. Not Lagos society, not business associates, but real people. The janitors from Landmark Towers, the waitresses from the diner where Grace and the old beggar had eaten together, the security guards who had watched Grace work with respect and dedication. Mrs. Okafor was there, crying happy tears. Even Marcus Chen flew in from London, because he said he'd never worked on a case that reminded him why he did what he did. And when the pastor asked David if he took Grace to be his wife, David's voice rang out clear and strong. He said, "I do, for richer or poorer, in power or in poverty. I do." And when Grace said the same words, she looked at David and saw both men, the beggar who had shared his bread and the king who had fought for her freedom. And she realized they had always been the same person, just as she had always been the same person, whether scrubbing floors or sitting in boardrooms. Because titles don't define us, my people. Character does. 5 years later, Grace and David stood in the lobby of a new building. Not Landmark Towers, but something different. A foundation. A place where people who had lost everything could come for help. For job training, for housing assistance, for a second chance. It was called the Grace Initiative, and it was funded entirely by the Oladele family fortune. On the wall, there was a plaque. It read, "The measure of a person is not how much they have, but how much they are willing to share when they have nothing." Grace stood in front of that plaque, 7 months pregnant with their first child, and she thought about the girl she used to be. The invisible girl who scrubbed floors. The girl who slept on sidewalks. The girl who shared bread with a beggar and never knew she was sharing it with a king. David stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and he said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't refused my bread that night?" Grace thought about it. Then she smiled. She said, "No, because kindness doesn't ask, 'What if?' Kindness just does what's right and trusts the universe to sort out the rest." David kissed her forehead gently, and as they walked through the foundation, through rooms full of people being given second chances, people being seen when the world had made them invisible, people being treated with the dignity every human being deserves, Grace knew something with absolute certainty. The dragon had been slain. The kingdom had been saved. And sometimes,
just sometimes, the fairy tale is real.
And what of Beatrice Okonkwo? She served 12 years of her 15-year sentence, got out on good behavior. When she was released, she had nothing. Her father had disowned her, her friends had abandoned her. Her reputation was destroyed. She found herself standing outside a building, looking for work, trying to start over. And the person who hired her, who gave her a job in the mailroom, who gave her a second chance, was Grace Oladele. Because Grace understood something that Beatrice was only beginning to learn. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the strongest thing in the world. And mercy, real mercy, is not about forgetting what someone did to you. It's about remembering and choosing kindness anyway.
My people, I have reached the end of the story, and I hope you heard what it was really about. Not about a poor girl and a rich man, not about revenge or justice or even love, but about this. The world will try to make you invisible. It will try to convince you that you don't matter, that your kindness is weakness, that your dignity is worthless. But you do matter. Your kindness is power, and your dignity is priceless. Never let anyone, not a boss, not a rival, not even yourself, convince you otherwise. Because one day, when you least expect it, the universe will remember what you did when no one was watching, and it will repay you. Not always with money, not always with fame, but with something more valuable than either. Truth, justice, and love. Now go, live your story. And when you meet someone who has nothing, share your bread. Because you never know when you're standing in front of a king. The end. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. You are appreciated highly.
Life stories with the innocent. Stories